It's Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by
Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher, and this, of course, is All the Above, where we take a look at things going on in the world of education. Jeff, did you know we are available on Spotify now?
Yes, I did. I've already subscribed, and so can you.
Nice. To find us on Spotify, just type in All the Above and click podcasts, and you'll see our lovely logo in the listings there. Jeff, did you know that somebody could listen to the audio podcast, but still might want to go over to the YouTube channel to see all of our episode extras?
That is fascinating. I had no idea, Manuel.
Indeed. If they go to youtube.com/alloftheabove, all one word, they'll find us.
All right.
So do that. All right, Jeff, what's on the agenda for this episode?
Well, as usual, Manuel, we have a great episode for folks. We're going to have, of course, our headlines, interesting topics, but our main segment today I'm really excited about. It is, that 4th of July season. Everybody's seeing red, white, and blue everywhere you go, at the grocery store, at Target. That's right. Flags waving and all that. And we're going to dive into this issue around a very controversial topic in our schools, having to do with the kind of patriotic flair of this particular season. That being the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh.
Should schools be in the business of requiring students to recite the pledge? Should students be able to opt out if they don't want to participate? We have lots of good stuff to talk about, and we're going to dig deep into it. You definitely don't want to miss it.
All right, sounds great. But up first is our Do Now, where we take a look at recent headlines in education. Okay, now it's time for a Do Now. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, school is out for the summer.
It is.
But for the unfortunate few, summer school is in session. So we got to take attendance. We got a roll call.
Roll call. All right, let's see what the first name is on our roster. Jeff, we have Michigan.
State of Michigan, the glove, right?
Is that? I've never heard that before.
Maybe it's the other way.
Is that what people in the Midwest
refer to? That's the lower peninsula. It looks like
glove.
a glove.
The only glove I know is Gary Payton.
Yeah, it's like an oven mitt.
Well, all right, the oven mitt of Michigan. So Michigan is a state that requires districts to rate teachers as highly effective, minimally effective, or ineffective based on classroom observations and a measure of student achievement. So, researchers at Michigan State University conducted a study looking at teacher evaluations from the 2010-2011 school year all the way through to the 2015-2016 school year, and looked at a total of 97,500 teacher evaluations and found, shockingly, that teachers of color are disproportionately more likely to be rated minimally ineffective or ineffective on evaluations than their white counterparts. In fact, across Michigan, nearly 19% of black teachers and about 13% of Latinx teachers received a low evaluation rating during those years compared to just 7% of white teachers. And teachers of color in schools with a predominantly white faculty are even more likely to receive low scores. So, Jeff, we are both teachers of color, and clearly we're no good at what we do.
All right. Well, it's been nice. Thanks for joining us today, folks. So I think there's a few interesting aspects of this story. So obviously the disproportionate ratings between white teachers and teachers of color are concerning. I will say that even though there are these disparate numbers, the gap between 7% of white teachers and 13% of black teachers still means we have 93% of white teachers being rated, some degree of effective, and close to 90% of black teachers being rated the same. So I do want to make sure that we're, calling out the,
it's a real
the
brighter
other
side of things,
much larger slice of the pie here, which is
Nice.
almost every teacher, regardless of your race in the state of Michigan, is evaluated as effective, right? And that is actually something that parallels trends nationally across the country, which to me in some ways is actually like one of the more interesting parts of this story, because around during the Obama years and the kind of change to federal legislation with Race to the Top,
Right.
a lot of states adopted, very much more theoretically at least strict teacher evaluation systems, including sometimes things like test scores or value-added measures and things of
Right.
that nature, right? The theory being that like almost everybody used to be rated satisfactory, and you had to like attack a child and steal all the money, and then maybe you could be rated unsatisfactory. And the theory of this kind of set of policies was if we evaluate people more strictly, we'll like get rid of the bad teachers and support the development of the good teachers, and like education will get better. And I think what we have seen is that actually is not what has happened. What's happened is almost everybody is still rated effectively. And the places where we have gaps are actually highlighting this other major issue in our profession, which is one, a lack of teachers of color in the classroom and a pushing out of teachers of color. And two, a lot of the inherent bias that's in the system that I think, one can certainly make a strong argument is rearing its face here.
Absolutely, because I'm sure somebody's listening and thinking, well, teachers of color are more likely to get some of the more difficult to handle students. I know when I started out in my career, I earned a reputation early on from administrators as being able to quote unquote handle the more difficult students. But this study actually controlled for various student achievement measures. So the results of the study are largely based on the classroom observation component. And something that was interesting that was embedded in the study was a data point that showed that male teachers are more likely to be rated favorably by male administrators, which speaks to sort of the I guess, inherent bias in classroom observations. And if the educator is more likely to look like you, then you're more likely to be perhaps biased in favor of them than you are a teacher that looks differently from you. And there being so few teachers of color in the profession, or there being not enough teachers of color in the profession, and there being a predominantly white administrative staff in the profession, goes to show that perhaps a lot of these administrators, when observing the classrooms of these black and brown teachers, that bias, if you want to call it that, is kicking in. Which is why I say these results to me aren't shocking, because I guess I would be shocked if there was no racial bias in there at all, because there's that racial bias everywhere else. If you want to call it bias, or if you want to call that straight out racism, from the jump. So I wasn't surprised by these results. You are right. Like, this does show that most teachers, the overwhelming majority of teachers, are not being rated ineffective. But still, that difference between 7% and 13% in the case of Latinx teachers, or 7% and 19% in the case of black teachers, that's teachers who, a lot of them maybe are using that as a justification for not coming back. For like, this job just must not be for me. So, I think about, even if it's a couple teachers here and there that decide to leave the profession based off these evaluation results, that's tragic.
Yeah, I agree completely. And even though the vast majority are still rated okay in this system, the disproportionate consequence of this on particularly people who are newer to the profession, particularly folks who might be working in areas where the urgency and the need for teachers of color in the classroom, as a number of recent studies have helped substantiate, that students of color and frankly white students tend to benefit from having a more diverse teaching staff in their schools, right? Both in terms of their academic learning and also in terms of the kind of cultural growth and development as citizens of this world, right? And so, if we have elements of our system that are actually running counter to the work that many states are trying to do, which is to recruit and retain teachers of color, we have these counter forces within the same system, right? So definitely something I would imagine Michigan is not alone on, but certainly something we need to address.
All right, the glove. Next story. What do we have? Who do we have next on the roster?
All right, man. Well, next up is it's an individual that, let's just say, I'm not particularly fond of at this point in time. You may have heard of this story, but you might not know her name. That is Georgia Clark.
Georgia Clark.
Georgia Clark.
Wholesome American name. Wholesome woman, I'm sure.
Yes, lemonade and apple pie.
Yeah, apple pie right there on the windowsill.
Yes.
Of course.
Hamburgers and football. Yes. So Georgia Clark, many of you may have heard about her because she is a veteran, or I should say was a veteran English teacher in Fort Worth, Texas, who sent a series of rather urgent tweets to one Donald J. Trump, at real Donald J. Trump, I believe it is, saying she needed help pulling undocumented immigrants from her school. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second. She said, and I quote, "Anything you can do to remove the illegals from Fort Worth would be greatly appreciated." Thinking it was, of course, a private message she was sending to her president.
Hustling backwards.
It was instead a very public tweet that the entire
Yikes.
world has now seen forever. Manuel, talk to me about Georgia.
Yeah,
here.
so I want to pull up some of these tweets because there are a lot of them. And again, she thought they were private messages to the president. They were quite public.
Yeah.
She spoke about the lack of protection for whistleblowers and the need to remain anonymous. And she put her full name and her cell phone number and tweeted it out for the whole world to see.
Isn't there just a certain degree of beautiful poetic justice in
there? There is.
Like, I hope nobody's done something crazy to this woman. No death threats, people. But like,
Get right.
if her life was a little bit miserable for a while, I'm okay. I'm good with that.
So in one of the tweets, she said, "Mr. President, Fort Worth Independent School District is loaded with illegal students from Mexico. Anything you could do would be greatly appreciated." She said, "Texas will not protect whistleblowers. The Mexicans refuse to honor our flag." She thought she was doing her patriotic duty, I suppose, by reporting or asking for help to round up so-called illegals. But what she was doing, obviously, it was dumb just off the bat, thinking that this is a private message to the president. That's, but we can focus on that, but let's not even focus on it. Let's focus on the fact that, contrary to what a lot of people believe, the Supreme Court has ruled that all children, regardless of citizenship status, have a right to an education. So here's a teacher trying to have students removed from the system, which violates Supreme Court orders, which violates all sorts of legislation. And that off the bat is just like, you've been in this profession for how long? And here you are basically asking the president to violate the law. And she might even know that it would be a violation of law, but in her view of the world and her view of patriotism, perhaps she felt this is yet another case where the president could violate the law for the betterment of the people and for making our country great again.
Yeah.
So just foolish all around. Another reminder that if you are in education and there is any sense or any group of students that you feel do not have a right to an education, you yourself have to leave the classroom, because every single name on your roster, regardless of who they are, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what regardless of anything, every name on your roster is deserving of a great education from you. And if you don't believe that, you got to get yourself out of the classroom, because it's not the place for you.
Well, I 100% agree with that. And I will just add that, not that this fact necessarily is, makes this transgression any worse, but it's just like a little more salt in the wound. So the Fort Worth school district is about 34% Latino students, right? So if you just imagine a teacher who's in the classroom thinking the kinds of thoughts that she has made very public and put out for the world to see about a third of the students in the room, right? Let alone the biases she may harbor against other students of color in that classroom, right? But just like on its face, it is, it's ridiculous, right? It's unprofessional. It's conduct that cannot be tolerated, and rightly, she was dismissed.
Yeah, they got rid of her right away. They had a public hearing. Nobody spoke out in her favor, which is great. But it does, I guess, remind me and remind us all, I think, that there are a lot of teachers out there who think these things, and perhaps she was one of the ones foolish enough to put it out there in public. I wonder how many private messages have gone to either the president or local law enforcement from teachers of the exact same sort. She is definitely not in isolation on this. And we reported last season about the number of teachers who don't believe in DACA and don't think that children, even under DACA protection, should be allowed to stay here. So again, if you're a teacher in America and you feel these things, you feel that any child at all is not deserving of an education, man, just get out the profession. Just get out. Like, we just don't need you.
There are so many things that one can do with their life.
So many great things you can do out there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Jeff. Last name on our roster for today.
All right.
It's a familiar name. Ryan Smith.
Okay.
Does that name ring a bell to you?
Ryan Smith is a recent guest on All of the Above who joined us to talk about the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools.
Yes.
That Ryan Smith?
That Ryan Smith.
All right.
All right. So, California State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, has recently announced a new initiative called Closing the Achievement Gap. And this is a new working group that will explore what it will take to improve educational outcomes for the most vulnerable students in California public schools. And Ryan Smith was named a co-chair of this initiative. This initiative will look closely at schools throughout the state that have shown success in improving outcomes for African American students, Latinx students, and other students of color, while also addressing the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. So Ryan Smith came on All of the Above to talk about transforming struggling schools, and now he's co-chair of this statewide initiative. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So, for those who saw our recent episode with Ryan, hopefully got a little bit of a taste of the really just dynamic champion for equity in schools that he is. And so on a purely personal level, it's exciting that someone like this would be in this type of position to have great impact on, state education policy. I will also say, and this might be something that some of our viewers and our listeners may not necessarily know or understand about California, that is somewhat unique. So the state of California is, unlike most states in the country, a majority-minority state. And in particular, when we think about and I get the, colonialist tongue twisting that phrase implies, but given that we are here in America, that's what we'll call it for now. And in particular, in the public schools, by themselves, Latinx students represent the majority of students in California's public schools, and that doesn't even include the African American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American students, right, who represent the significant majority of students in our public schools. So, unlike a lot of the dynamics around, around the country, where the situation tends to be the majority group is white, and the minority groups are various populations of students of color. California is operating in a context where Latinx students and communities are both the majority numerically, but also the minority in many ways in terms of political power, in terms of financial power and influence, in terms of the issues that come along with immigration status and marginalization, and certainly being still a language minority in terms of the dominant language in schools. Right. And so there's a lot of really complex issues here, because we have the majority population that still struggles with a lot of the disproportionate impacts of a historically racist system, right? But also commands a great deal of attention because they are a very large group. Yeah. And then we have many other smaller minority groups that are also still struggling with a lot of those same equity issues. And so, it's a complex racial landscape that we're talking about, and one that I think, someone like Ryan is well poised to help enter, and I think bring hopefully some clarity to the direction of both the state superintendent of instruction, Tony Thurmond, and our new governor, Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, so a few things. First of all, I wonder if the woman mentioned in our last story, Georgia Clark, will be sending anonymous public tweets to Ryan Smith about this majority-minority problem in California, and that something needs to be done about it. Secondly, Ryan sat down for a Q&A with LA School Report, which we'll link on our website, where he discusses a lot of these concerns that Jeff brought up, but also sort of the vision for the path forward for how to close what's called the achievement gap in this initiative, but what he and many others refer to as more of an opportunity gap, because this isn't something where the students themselves are the problem. It's something where the opportunities that are presented to them, that's where the systemic inequity lies. So he has a lot to say about that in his Q&A, which we'll link on our website. Also, I think it goes to show that all the above is a place where we really bring in some of the top dogs in education, and appearing on all the above just might be, I don't know, there might be some link between this and future career moves,
one can certainly make that argument.
The AOTA bump,
yes.
we could call it.
That's what we'll call it. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie, Kamala, you want to come on AOTA and talk education policy?
Come through.
Let's do it.
All right, folks. So that about does it for today's Do Now. Up next, we'll have our show and tell, where Jeff has a special message about the Pledge of Allegiance. So stay tuned.
It's that time of year when red, white, and blue becomes the colors of everything, from picnic food to socks and t-shirts. But what about our schools? What role should patriotism play in the education of our nation's public school children? I think there are 31 words that, perhaps more than any other, dramatize the tension between freedom of speech, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, and calls for patriotism and national unity. And they go like this: I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's right, the Pledge of Allegiance. In court cases and principals' offices, the issue of whether or not schools should compel students to recite the pledge has remained a controversial issue to this day. Some have argued that requiring students to recite the pledge amounts to forced political speech, which violates the First Amendment. Others have argued that the phrase "under God" amounts to unconstitutional state endorsement of religion. And others have argued that the state requiring the pledge in schools is reminiscent of the practices of totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany or North Korea, and is distasteful, even if not technically illegal. And of course, there have been powerful forces who have argued in favor of the pledge, including the U.S. Congress, many U.S. presidents, and national civic organizations. And would you believe that the full legality of states requiring the Pledge of Allegiance in schools is actually not yet clearly decided, and that there are widely varying laws on the books from state to state? Some states require that schools offer the pledge to students each day. Some states protect that option, but allow local districts to manage those requirements. Some states allow it, but protect students' right to abstain. And some states don't mention it in the law at all. So, before we dive into discussing this fascinating topic, let's take a step back and review a brief history of the pledge and how these 31 words came to be a part of many students' experience in public schools. First, in September of 1892, the pledge, written by Francis Bellamy, who was an ordained minister, was published in a youth magazine as part of an effort to instill national unity and celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. In 1942, the pledge is officially recognized by the U.S. federal government. The pledge did not contain the words "under God" in its original form. Those words were actually added in 1954 during the early stages of the Cold War as an overt attempt to defend against godless communism. Over the next 50 years, the pledge would be adopted as a requirement in most states to be recited daily in public schools. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and a series of court challenges are brought claiming the pledge violates the First and 14th Amendment protections. The Supreme Court ultimately rules that the words "under God" do not need to be removed from the pledge, as they don't represent a government endorsement of religion. Long story short, case law seems to suggest that while students cannot be compelled to recite the pledge, states and schools are allowed to offer the opportunity for students to recite the pledge. And in all, 32 states in this country have laws on the books that specifically allow students to opt out. 15 states have laws that are either unclear on the matter or delegate that choice to parents. And 3 states have no laws regarding the pledge in their schools at all. So, in a nation that prides itself on being a beacon of democracy, should the Pledge of Allegiance be practiced in our public schools? Should teachers and school administrators be in the position of encouraging or even coercing students to recite a claim of political allegiance and patriotism in America's classrooms?
So if you're listening to the audio podcast, I think it's important for you to know that I did change my tie out for this segment, and I'm wearing my American flag tie, which was gifted to me by a student. Shout out to Kari. I got it a couple years ago, and I'm wearing this tie because clearly we have a left-wing liberal extremist sitting next to me on this show, and I want it to be clear to everybody that I love America. I don't know about my co-host.
I question though, between the two of us, who's been called a libtard?
I have been called that. I have been.
Okay, yes.
So in all seriousness, I really appreciate that you're bringing up this topic because I entered the profession in the early 2000s, and I remember a lot of talk at the time about the pledge, and maybe it's because the cases that you mentioned in your talk. But there was a lot of discussion about the pledge at the time, and I feel like it's been quite a few years since I've really heard anybody in education circles talk about the pledge and its place in American schools. So I do want to start with just a clarifying question. Jeffrey Garrett opens up his own school. We already know it's going to have a dress code based on previous episodes. Does your school have a Pledge of Allegiance moment?
I think my technical answer to that would be, as an educator, I will follow state education code.
Of course.
As an individual in this society, as a person of good conscience, I could not compel students to participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. My very firm belief on this issue is that I think the pledge has no place in public schools whatsoever. Apart from any individual student who might want to take it upon themselves to recite the pledge, the same way that a student might take it upon themselves to want to engage in prayer or meditation or something, that's fine. But I think as an arm of the state, schools have no place in pressuring, requiring, mandating students to recite the pledge.
All right, so that's interesting on a few levels. Number one, I think it's clear, hopefully to everybody, that most states don't force it in terms of you being sent to the principal's office for not reciting the pledge in the morning. And at least in California, I've been, my whole teaching career, aside from student teaching, has been in California. And I've been at schools that would read the pledge over the intercom and students would stand. Some students would stand, some wouldn't, but they weren't compelled or forced to stand. So I think it's clear, I hope it's clear to most of our audience that you're not in favor, and neither am I, in favor of forcing students to stand and recite the pledge or be written up or sent to the principal's office or something like that. But in terms of having a moment, let's say first few minutes of the school day, where it is either recited over the intercom or individual teachers recite it, and those who want to stand and recite it can, and those who don't. Are you against having that specific moment in the school day where the pledge is really like the topic or the focus of those couple minutes?
Yeah, I am. And I'll explain why. So I think almost everyone, apart from like the true fascists among us, would be in favor of a policy that does not force someone to say something like the Pledge of Allegiance that they don't want to say, right? So hopefully we at least all have some kind of common ground on that issue. But to me, where things are really nuanced and problematic is that we don't really operate in a world in which students are mandated by threat of punishment of some kind to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Although there have been some interesting cases that have popped up where there's been some tension around that, but policy-wise, that's typically not the case in our society. The real issue is if the principal or a student or a teacher gets on the intercom at 8 a.m. every morning and says, all right, everybody, now's the time for the pledge, right? The very implicit and very direct message in that PA announcement as a school is it is your job to pay attention, it is your job to follow the directions that are being given, and if you don't, you're somehow not a upstanding member of this community. Right. And so particularly when that message is one that is conflated with your loyalty to the country, your, being someone who has common beliefs in things like freedom or, democracy, right? And I also believe that there is no actual connection between the Pledge of Allegiance and any real belief in freedom or democracy, but that's probably a topic for a separate show. But I think in a school, we have to be mindful of the fact that what gets airtime and what gets promoted as the message of the school comes with the weight and the pressure of the school, right? That's not the same thing as saying, it's recess, it's free time, you can do what you want. And these kids over here are going to go say the Pledge of Allegiance because they want to say the Pledge of Allegiance as a fun activity while the other kids are on the jungle gym or whatever, right? Or playing basketball. That's not what's happening. It's a compelled activity that you then have to opt out of and then carry the weight and responsibilities of being the one who opts out. And if you layer on your status as, say, a Muslim or a Jehovah's Witness or some other religious minority in this country, or if you layer on your status as a black person, right, or someone who doesn't want to stand during the Pledge of Allegiance because of whatever political beliefs you hold, that comes with a lot of threat of being ostracized and excluded in a way that I think is really problematic.
All right, and I hear you on that. For one, am thinking about the case in Florida that received national attention when a student ended up being arrested, an 11-year-old kid who didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Apparently it was a substitute teacher, and it was time for Pledge of Allegiance, and the student didn't want to stand. He said something about it being racist or America being racist against black people. The substitute teacher apparently tried to force him to stand or got on him about it, and then it escalated and it became a situation where he was disciplined and eventually arrested, an 11-year-old kid. And the pledge was at the center of it. I like that you, in that case, the school clarified after the fact that they don't force their students to recite the pledge, but this substitute apparently didn't know that and felt that the student should be forced. I like that you clarify that even if it's not forced in the sense of a student, being disciplined for not standing, it is forced in the quiet way of look around and who's not standing and let's, build our own impressions about that person for not standing. You could think about the NFL example, of course. And NFL didn't have any rules saying that players had to stand for the national anthem. One player chose not to stand, and it became this whole big kerfuffle. Like, technically, no, he didn't have to stand. However, him not standing became this whole big thing.
I like that use of the term.
Kerfuffle.
Kerfuffle.
Yes, that is the word of the day. Kerfuffle.
Yes.
Don't ask me to spell it because I would not be able to. So even if on the books, technically, students have the choice on whether to stand or not, depending on the situation or depending on the school or the community, that choice to not stand could be a really heavy choice for a youngster to make. And if the school doesn't offer any guidance to teachers for how to help navigate that situation, to help defend and protect students who are maybe in that particular school in the minority of students who don't want to stand or don't want to recite the pledge, if the school isn't doing that to make sure their educators know how to sort of handle these situations, then you are going to be left with students in that rough spot of do I stand, even though maybe my parents told me not to, but I don't want to be ostracized, I don't want to be called out of my name during recess or whatever. So I agree with you on that. Now, the issue with the pledge itself, is your issue more with the concept of pledging allegiance to a country generally, or is it the wording in the under God part? Because the under God part received a lot of attention, but in terms of the pledge as a whole, it sounds like that's where your problem isn't the wording of the under God, but it's really the...
Well, I would say my problem is with both. I think, in its totality, I find it problematic. So the parsing out of individual phrases is only one small piece of the larger thing.
Right.
I fundamentally disagree with the Supreme Court that the idea that we are compelling students to say under God, which for sure carries with it the loaded assumption that we are God
Yeah.
loving religious people in contrast to the evil empire of the godless communists, right?
Right.
Like the intention and the actual language is not unclear at all, even though it is, of course, not endorsing any particular religion, but we have polytheistic religions, right? What do
right.
Hindus think about under God?
Right.
We have atheists. We have people who are are agnostic, right? And
Right.
maybe have a different definition of spirituality. And so I think that phrase is, of course, problematic, and in my mind, of course, a violation of what the First Amendment should be about, and is definitely an example of the state establishing religion in some manner.
Right.
However, my larger issue with it is really more at the kind of larger philosophical level. If we're a secure democracy, if America is as good and as great as it says it is, as we
Right.
say we are, then we shouldn't have to force young kids to salute the flag in the corner of the room every day in order to get people to believe it.
Yeah.
We should be able to have people experience it, feel what it is, learn about it, understand what it is, and emerge from that process saying, yes, I have allegiance to
Right.
this country because I believe in what it's about, right? And I think the existence of the pledge actually reveals the kind of dark underbelly of our nation, which is we have not been as great as we think our values are and should be. And so for that reason, I fundamentally think it's a problem to compel people to pledge allegiance, and that a real mature democracy wouldn't have to do that, wouldn't feel insecure because we're not doing that.
All right, and there's no reason why households couldn't recite the pledge in their own household,
Sure.
if that's their belief. But
Yeah.
having schools, obviously dictated by the government, have this time during the school day where the pledge is a thing, that's definitely sort of where we cross the line of the government sort of infringing upon people's individual
Yeah.
liberties to. And if you love America, that love should probably be best expressed in your civic engagement, not in reciting scripted words that you're forced to stand up and recite, or else you'll be, receiving a talking to from your classmates or something. I agree with you there. If I were to open my own school right now, the Pledge of Allegiance honestly wouldn't be part of it. Not because I have a very strong opinion against it. It's something that I honestly haven't really thought about. It's been quite a while since I've recited the Pledge of Allegiance. I was at a city council meeting where they asked me, they're like, Rustin, recite the pledge, to open up the meeting, and I wasn't expecting that, and I recited it, but there was definitely a bit of questioning in my head of like making sure I got the words right, because it had been so long since I've verbally recited the Pledge of Allegiance. I see it as something that, again, like if we are talking about, especially the fact that you brought this up in this day and age where our political climate is extremely intense, I think we really need to talk about how do we help students learn how to be civically engaged and how to have constructive criticism of the country and help be part of the solutions to make our country better versus just pretend patriotism. And that pretend patriotism comes with all the red, white, and blue everywhere and shutting down voices that seem to criticize either the president or this policy or that policy. That pretend patriotism, which lies in the direction of fascism, that's something that we definitely have to target and make sure we address. But this, like, having students feel that they have to stand and face the flag and recite something that was written to celebrate the 400-year anniversary of Columbus so-called discovering America, that's definitely problematic. I'd be interested in hearing what other educators have to say who are listening or watching this video, because I think different schools and different districts have their own, I guess, sort of culture or tradition around the pledge. And I'd like to hear from any teacher that feels that they themselves maybe feel the pressure from administration or from whoever to make sure their students are standing during the Pledge of Allegiance. Because I'm sure there's teachers out there who agree with you and kind of feel that sort of like, I agree, but I don't want to raise a, kerfuffle over this.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's teachers who totally disagree with me and
for sure.
feel that I am,
Georgia Clark
am
being
now
one of
the
them.
enemy of the state.
Georgia Clark is
so we
tweeting
want to
right
hear
now.
from you too, but it's a fascinating topic for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Jeff, thank you for bringing that up. But as always, helping build the context around a topic that so many people have opinions about but don't quite know sort of the history and the road of how we got there in the first place. So thank you very much for that. Up next is our Class Dismissed. All right, folks, it's about that time for our Class Dismissed, where we like to shout out people doing great things in the realm of education. And this week's class dismissed goes out to Emmett J. Conrad High School Valedictorian Rooha Haghar. You may have seen video of her valedictorian speech, which was cut off right in the middle by her principal. In her graduation speech, she's quoted as saying, "To the kids that were murdered in senseless mass shootings, to Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, and all the other children who became victims," and then it just falls silent. If you look at the video, which you're probably looking at now, if you're watching the video version of this episode, you see her principal sitting in the background signaling for the mic to be cut off as soon as she mentioned those names of unarmed black kids who were killed. So the principal, I don't know how to say his name. I'm going to try. Do you know how to say that? Give it a shot, Jeff.
Temiskin Asmirom.
I would be willing to bet that's not correct.
I'm sure I did not do that name honor, but the principal of Emmett J. Conrad High School.
Yeah, so he gets up, taps the microphone, and then proceeds with graduation, seemingly acting like it was a technical glitch, as if he himself hadn't asked for the mic to be cut off. So Haghar tweeted, "My valedictorian speech was cut short because I said the names of black children who had become victims of police brutality. Our principal signaled for my mic to be turned off as soon as I said Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice, and he played it off as a technical difficulty. Pathetic." She says she also wanted to talk about kids across the globe affected by war, famine, persecution, and child labor in order to remind her classmates that they have an obligation to their community and the world at large. So she was out there speaking up for these victims of police brutality, and she got cut off for doing it. Man, Jeff, what's going on?
So first of all, I want to give serious props to Rooha. She actually completed her speech in her own digital post online that went up on social media. So we'll put up the link. You can check out the remainder of the speech that was cut off. And I have to say, we're trying in school to raise socially conscious, globally conscious young people.
Indeed.
There's nothing that she said that's particularly controversial. There's a few things she said that are hard truths. Like in this country, we kill young black children without any repercussions.
Right.
But that's just looking in the mirror. And so the fact that they cut her off for saying this, I think, is really tragic, taking her moment as someone who's worked incredibly hard to be the valedictorian of her high school and to deliver this really powerful and important message. So I just want to say props to Rooha. I really appreciated your speech. We need more young people like you who are using your platform in whatever way it exists to call out injustice and to speak truth to power. So congratulations, class of 2019 at Emmett Conrad High School.
Absolutely. And
congratulations, Rooha, on a great speech.
I mean, here she was exercising some civic engagement in terms of calling for her classmates to help do better to improve this country and this world. And
that's exactly what you
want
want in
Pledge
a
of
speech,
Allegiance,
right?
She wouldn't have been cut off, I bet, for the Pledge of Allegiance. She would have just recited some words that spoke about liberty and justice for all.
Waving flags and everything.
Yeah, but actually being specific about how to bring that justice for all, or just calling for there to be justice. Cut it off. Sit down.
It's a cold world out there.
Cold world.
Yeah. All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us today. As always, you can find all of our content on our website. That's aotashow.com. Again, aotashow.com. And we are everywhere online.
Everywhere.
We talked about our podcast is now up on Spotify. Super easy to find. Just type in the name of the show, all the above. Hit search. It'll pop up for you. Please subscribe, follow us, like our posts. It might sometimes seem like these are just small gestures, but each one of these small gestures has a big snowball effect and helps us get the word out about the show. So if you like what you see, please let us know and share it with your friends. We really appreciate it. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time on All the Above.